Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Docker-sponsored open source panel for the community all hands. My name is Alyssa Shames. I am your host. I'm on the Docker product marketing team. And joining me today and hosting is Brittany Blodgett, our product manager for the publisher team, also covering the Docker-sponsored open source program. So today our panel is Take Your Projects to the Next Level with the Docker-sponsored open source program. And we will be reviewing a little bit of a few updates and a revamp of the program. And we have a great panel for everyone today from a variety of different industries where they will share the real world experiences using the program, as well as how the Docker-sponsored open source program can help push your projects forward. And then at the end, we'll go over some new qualifications and criteria for applying to the program. So just getting into a little bit of what the Docker-sponsored open source program is for maybe some new members here. But this is Docker's community program that provides a platform for our non-commercial open source developers to continue to collaborate, innovate, and push your projects forward. So this means that this is a program that's truly for the community, where we're providing some Docker tools and features to help you just get your innovation on. Some of the exciting announcements for today that I really wanted to go over, and that we will also review again at the end, just so that everyone can remember, is that again, we have some new qualifications and criteria for the program, one of which I think is a big change from the past. We are now allowing funding for all of our projects. So that's really exciting. We do take a look at this every year for your application. So you do have to reapply every year, and that's when we'll take a look at any funding and potential pathways to commercialization as we're reviewing your submission. Some feature updates that we have: we've updated our badging in Docker Hub. Here's an example on the screen. You now will have a purple sponsored OSS badge next to your namespace. And then lastly, what's I think very exciting for all of us here at Docker is that we have some updated insights and analytics that's also available through Docker Hub or our API. And that will just provide you some more insight on usage for your projects, as well as any potential insight into your users. So you can learn all of this information and submit your application on our website. Just go to docker.com. If you go to the developers tab and then go under the community page, you can find the Docker-sponsored open source program and apply there. Without further ado, I would like to get into our panelists. So here is a lovely list of everyone who's speaking with us today. I'm actually going to let them go through and give their own intros, because they could probably do it much better than I can. So let's get started with that. We'll start with Brittany.
Hi, everyone. I'm a product manager at Docker for the content publisher team. This includes the open source, the Docker-sponsored open source program, and our verified publisher program, and also our Docker official images. So essentially all types of images that are a part of our trusted content program. And today we have a great panel of members of our Docker-sponsored open source program, and I'll let them get started. We will start with I think it's Gravita we're starting with, or maybe it's Matteo. I forgot the order we talked about.
No problem, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name is Matteo Lodi, and I work as a threat intel lead engineer in Certigo, which is a managed security service provider in Italy. So I work in the cybersecurity field, basically. And I'm the creator of an open source project named Intel, which is an open source application that you can find in GitHub, and it is a cybersecurity application, and its targets are basically cybersecurity analysts and security researchers.
Thanks, Matteo. I think we'll go, take Gravita now.
Hi, I'm Garvita Kapoor. I am the Senior Director of Digital Technology at New York Public Library and lead a team of engineers in QA to build, maintain digital products and services at the library, help set policies and other digital related activities, and advance the mission of the library. One of the products that my team works on is Library Simplified, and we have an app called Simply E, which is a product for the libraries by the libraries, and you'll hear more about that during the panel.
Sorry,
So
go
hello,
ahead,
no
Damien.
problem. So hello, my name is Damien Portal. I'm a French person working from Belgium. I'm a software engineer for the Jenkins Project. I'm working for Cloudbees, a company that sells an enterprise edition and a set of products for continuous delivery. I'm the lead Jenkins officer. So my role is to lead the SRE team in charge of the public Jenkins infrastructure used to download plugins, Jenkins mirrors, and also provide the resources to build Jenkins for the contributors.
Thanks, Damien. Phil, you want to go?
Yeah, my name is Phil Yules, and I work as a lead developer advocate at Secura Labs. I've been an academic researcher in science and working in genomics and genetics. And I've built some open source communities, namely one called NF Core, which I'll be talking about later. And we work with workflow management, specifically a tool called Nextflow. And we're really interested in, we use Docker a lot to manage software containerization within these workflows used within academia and also industry.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for those intros. Super excited to have such a diverse panel talk about the open source program today. I'll jump off into our first question. I know that each of you has kind of given an overview about your project, but can you tell us about your project and why the Docker-sponsored open source program was appealing to you?
I start again. Yeah. Intel is a project that basically is a web-based application, and like most of the most used web applications, recently we obviously leverage Docker because our application is containerized, and so we have each part of our application executed in a different container. And so because of that, we also leverage, for example, Docker Compose for orchestrate all of our containers together. And also recently, we started to explore Docker Swarm to have also the chance to deploy our application in a distributed architecture, so to create a cluster of Intel Owl for the Intel Owl project. And so because of all of that, basically Docker is something really important for our application. It's the base that we use for running our application. So the Docker sponsored open source program is very useful for us. We joined this program. We were accepted in this program last year, almost about 1 year ago. And the best privilege that we leveraged were the auto builds, because that is a very useful feature for us, because we don't have to think about creating the images for our applications manually, or just to think about even creating them, because Docker Hub does it for us. And so we can just focus on creating the features for our application, and we can just focus on the code. So as developers of Intel Owl, we want to focus on the features, on the bug fixing, on the code, and in that way we can just we can just how can I say? I can just ignore the fact that we have also to manage those those images. So that's really useful for us, and that's it.
Thank you.
Sure, I'll go next then. The way people consume books has evolved as the world has become more digital. A lot of our readers turn to ebooks and audiobooks rather than physical books. Libraries have a responsibility to provide the same open, easy, and free access to ebooks and audiobooks to its patrons like it did with physical books. Library Simplified is a product that transforms the relationship between patrons and their libraries. It's an e-reading suite, a software suite that allows libraries to manage their collection and control the patron experience. We have an app called Simply E that allows patrons to browse, borrow, and read ebooks and listen to audiobooks using an Android or iOS app. This product is for the libraries, by the libraries, with a sort of, very patron-focused experience. During the pandemic, when the branches were closed, Simply E was our digital library, putting books in the hands of children and adults from all walks of life to make knowledge available freely. It allows for unified user experience by allowing libraries to make books and collections available from different vendors, from different publishers, all in one app, rather than having to use multiple commercial apps. It lets libraries be the driver of change and control the digital experience and the curation of the books, rather than being limited by what the vendor provides. It's a product that is privacy first, accessible, and works on a range of devices to provide maximum access to patrons who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Libraries are often limited when it comes to funding and resources, and we have to stretch those limited resources as much as we can. Simply E is also used by partners who are libraries who have the same constraints as us. So the Docker-sponsored open source program allowed us to lower that barrier to entry by allowing us to package and release our products. So libraries with smaller teams could sort of download and try it and see if it's the right thing for them. This would have been a huge challenge without Docker. This was one of the main driving factors for us to embrace the open source program by Docker.
Awesome. Thank you. Damien?
So a bit more about my project. So now I feel ashamed because it's only a software project compared to what you are doing, folks. So Jenkins is an open source project. It's quite a mature one. It exists since more than a decade, and it's an automation server built on top of the Java virtual machine. So it has a large ecosystem of thousands of plugins. And this year we were happy to reach the amount of 300,000 installation of Jenkins in the world, which is, yeah, we are proud of that. So that's one usually consumed by developers when they build the application to try to fit on continuous integration processes, a methodology. So each time your code change, then Jenkins pick a change and try to build a change and give you a report of the tests and the capability of your application to be deployed, where the goal is to make code change a non-event. So Jenkins is open source and free since the beginning, it has been. So anyone is able to contribute. And so why are we interested in Docker? For multiple reasons. First one has been packaging and deploying Jenkins itself as a Docker image. The Docker Hub is really a nice showcase because a lot of people are using it. It provides simple UX. You search the image, you have a nice documentation to get started. You have one command to get the image and then you go, thanks to the Docker technical assets behind. But also Jenkins use Docker to run these workloads because most of the workloads can be code changed by a developer on a Windows machine and then compile on a Linux machine and deploy to, let's say, something else. So the portability here is really impressive because thanks to Docker, we're able to provide the same environment, which can be as much portable as possible. and that helps developer to focus and transform some implicit knowledge, such as I need that version of the JDK, I need that version of Golang, that version of Ruby, that version of Python, that version of that script. That implicit information has to be written, and it's a kind of documentation as code. You put the value we saw in Docker was the ability to force to focus on the right and important information that every teams on the chain, on the workflow chain, care about. And the interest we had shifted to the Docker sponsored program, because first, the ability to get past the API rate limit for our users was really, really impressive. It changed the way our user consumed the images. We are also an open source project, and we live based on sponsorships. So it's only company giving us money or free services, such as the Docker sponsor open source, that allows us to live. With that, we are able to onboard contributors to help scholarships to build and deploy any patch on any plugin of Jenkins, thanks to the huge work that we have there. So that's why we were interested on being part of that open source as a consumer, but also as an open source citizen. We used to ask our contributor to give back the community if Jenkins helped them. There, it's also a bidirectional process for us. We use and consume the advantages of the Docker sponsor open source, but we teach people about Docker, and we try to give as much feedback as possible to the product management team, because there are things that are really great. Sometimes there are some rough edges that can be fixed in a few minutes, but it's important to communicate that, because we don't know the context of the other, and no software can be perfect. So being a first-class citizen in open source world is also contributing back by helping the people who help you. That's why we were interested on that program as well.
Thank you. That's a great point about giving back with feedback. Love hearing feedback. It helps us drive the program better, make it better for everyone. So awesome point. Phil, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think with such a diverse panel, it's easy to feel like an outsider, but I think we're probably not so different. Many of the themes that everyone has talked about are relevant for us as well. And Damien, actually, we even used Jenkins years ago for our project. So yeah, so for me, I'm originally a biologist. I never actually trained as a software developer. And I worked in the lab doing research and started doing my own analysis of the data I was generating, and got into this burgeoning new field called bioinformatics, which is just data analysis for biological data. And back when I started working in bioinformatics, you would see a study that someone had published, and generally we've been very good with publishing data. So you'd be able to get a hold of the raw data that someone had produced. But the core of the scientific method is reproduction, being able to reproduce somebody else's results. And doing the software analysis for this was just famously difficult. And the reproducibility of science has been famously poor for quite some time. And the reason is the analysis would often involve using a chain of steps, maybe 30 different tools, and each of those would be packaged in different places with different requirements and different installation. And the underlying kind of dependencies underneath those tools would shift over time. So very often you try and come back and build on what someone else had started, and it would take you days, weeks more to try and get all this stuff up and running. And when you finally, either you would fail and give up, or you would get to the end and the results would be different to what was originally observed. So that reproducibility was a real problem. And in the years I've been working in the field, several kind of big advances have happened. Software containers has really, I wouldn't say revolutionized, it's in the process of revolutionizing how we do scientific analysis. And so what I work with now is a tool called Nextflow. Nextflow is a workflow manager, which means that when I write an analysis now, I write it as one big script, which runs all these different steps. And the tool chains all of those together, handles the parallelization, but also handles the underlying containers. And so now each one of those steps, all those different pieces of software, have their own Docker container. And with that comes all of the dependencies all the way down. And now I can both reproduce other people's analysis, and also that those tools are much more portable across different systems. So it's much, much easier. I can run someone else's analysis with a single command. Nextflow will pull all those Docker containers. All those containers can be stored in different Docker repositories. And so we started off with Docker Hub, and it's been fantastic for hosting the images, and it just works. So yeah, I mean, Docker has been hugely important in the way that scientific research is done, and that reproducibility and portability is key. In terms of the open source program at Docker, I mean, we are also entirely volunteer-led community driven. We have some sponsorship models. Mostly people work on the project kind of in their free time or as part of different projects that they're working on. So being able to kind of work on a shoestring and use these kinds of programs is key to us. And the auto builds, always things that have already been mentioned, they let us get up and running at speed with minimal kind of manual oversight, I guess. And also being able to go back to any of the pipelines we've produced, at any of the different versions that we've released, and pull the exact container that was used. It means that I can take a pipeline that someone wrote 4 years ago and run it at that version with those versions of those Docker containers, and everything is exactly as it was. It's a game changer.
Awesome. I love hearing about how Docker has helped support reach y'all's missions. One of the measures of success on our team is we're only successful if we're helping all of our members meet their goals. And that's hard to measure with quantitative data. So getting feedback and having conversations like this, qualitative data, and hearing that we are helping support your missions and other ways that we can help, is just great feedback. We love to hear it. So yes, thank you for sharing that. I will move on to our next question. So there's been a lot of conversation happening about the sustainability of the open source ecosystem. I'm curious about what you all see as the biggest risks facing the open source community, and how all companies, including Docker, can help provide solutions and better support you. You'd start with Matteo again.
Yeah. Well, I have a biased point of view because, as I mentioned, I work in cybersecurity. So the first thing that came to my mind is the software vulnerabilities. So basically, maybe a lot of people here and developers have heard about security vulnerability for a very common library called log4j. This library is a very common used library in Java applications. And well, the problem that happened more than 1 year ago at the start of 2021 was that was disclosed a really severe critical vulnerability for this library. It was a remote code vulnerability, remote code execution vulnerability. So basically, it means that every application who was built with this library had basically a backdoor inside of it. And that was huge because most every application running with Java was leveraging that library. The point of all of that is that this library is open source, and was maintained by really few number of people, unpaid. So basically, a lot of companies with a lot of money, really big companies, were relying on such kind of libraries that are not financed by anyone. And well, the risk is that in the end, you have to consider these libraries. You cannot just think that you can use the open source projects because they are free and well, so everyone just you can use them without giving back anything to them. So the point is that if I think that companies who has the possibilities, the chances to invest and money in open source projects that are very valuable to them, but also to the other community, should invest more in these open source libraries, for example, to avoid to have this kind of problems, because the problem is that these few people had no time to maintain this project because they had no financial help. And so I think the company should be more responsible in that way. Also because, I mean, this is also an insurance for the companies themselves, because, well, if these problems arise, then it's a really big problem for them. So it is a win-win. It is a win for the companies who leverage this open source library. It is a win for the open source libraries itself, and all the other companies or amateurs or everyone who is using these libraries, because well, they would be very well maintained and upgraded, and all of these problems would not arise. And so this is, I think, the biggest risk that already happened, and I'm sure that will happen again with another kind of similar open source library very soon. I'm not the pessimistic, but I think that this is the truth of this moment.
Yeah, securing the software supply chains for open source is hugely important. And it's something that Docker is investing greatly in, and we're looking forward about sharing some of those solutions with our Docker sponsored open source members as well. So keep your eyes open for some features regarding that. Gravita, do you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with Matteo that, you know, security is definitely a big risk. Another one is stability. It is something we struggle with ourselves, especially for a project like ours, where, you know, the community is on the smaller side and the community is mostly non-technical. And it's a complex project, so it's not that easy to contribute back in the same way you could with some of the other projects. It just takes a lot of time from the engineers to sort of build, maintain a product, let alone support a community. So it's a bit of a balancing act, trying to sort of do feature development, maintenance, security, support, and sort of be there for the community. Organizations often underestimate the total cost of ownership of open source projects. You know, whether it's an open source project that you've created for the community, or even if you're consuming an open source project, there's a underestimation of the cost of ownership there. So, I mean, we rely a lot on other organizations, like organizations like yours, like Docker, you know, for open source sponsorship programs. There are other organizations that do that too, and which help us lower our cost, or we get, you know, what we can for free, and we apply for grants and funding where we can to continue to do the support work. The more companies that sort of help with funding there, I think is definitely a good thing, but also mostly all companies nowadays sort of use open source to an extent. So most companies should sort of think about creating an open source strategy. Like what does open source mean to them? How does it align with their business goals? And if possible, sort of align it with their environmental and social governance investments, and sort of see how this can be a holistic approach. And so it not only generates value for the company itself, but is also for the greater good of the open source community. Because, I mean, there's so many ways people can contribute, but if everybody thought of it a bit more collectively, I think we could solve a lot of problems. As Helen Keller said, alone we can do little, together we can do so much. So the more people who get into this, I think we can achieve a lot.
I love that quote. Yeah, so part of the revamping of the Docker sponsored open source program is reevaluating our strategy and how we can better, like, holistically support not just with our platform, but in where we put our investments. And so you hit the nail on the head there. Thank you. Damian?
Thanks. That's a lot of food for thought. So one of the sustainability issue we also have, additionally to the usual concern about the cost of ownership of open source inside the company. It's free in a beer or syrup or tea, which means you still need to brew it. That's the main idea, is contribute back. If you want sustainability, you are actor and you can be an engine as well. A lot of users are consuming open source because it's free, which makes sense, because it's known to be stable and sustainable compared to most of the proprietary software that we have seen during the past decades. But the thing is that we have to contribute back, and contributing back is not, we think that as either giving money or paying high-skilled developers, engineers that know everything, but that's only just a minor part of the contribution. The first step on contribution is first being kind and acknowledging that it's free. People are doing that on their own time most of the time, except some lucky person like I am, because I'm paid for that, but it's just an exception. Most of the time you have people that have kids live and they are not paid. So be kind and try to help them to help you. Provide feedbacks, but constructive feedbacks. Don't expect an answer immediately because whatever. Yeah, maybe you have an issue when using open source that frustrate you, that create a danger for your own job. I can totally understand and feel that. However, the people are not committed to that. If you want them to commit, they have to be motivated to help you. That's how most of the society work. But that's one of the major risks I see there, because that kind of behavior is increasing, maybe because of the popularity of open source that increased during the past decades, that allowed a lot of people to start using it and contributing, but also diminished some safe spaces and created new behaviors that are really making people flee. We have a lot of people that don't feel safe. Not only it's hard to contribute or work because it's how you write in a different language, it's a variation of cultures across the world depending on your own experience, but contributing in form of code, updating documentation can be hard, especially if someone, and that's also the problem of us maintainer, we are not always polite, or we don't create safe space for people to have the right to fail, try, retry, and learn from that. And that's for me one of the major issues in the sustainability, is that by only being in a pattern of consuming and asking for results, especially we saw that with the Log4j example that Matteo explained, there were people in less than 2 hours after the publication of the security advisory that were starting to insult the maintainers of Log4j. They were literally, resolve my problem and you're a dick. I mean, what's the incentive you want? What the message you want to pass? I'm a bit confused by that kind of message personally, but that went pretty far. The maintainer of curl, that's a command line tool to request web server, he received tons of email with threats, death threats, because someone saw that it was an open source project with his own phone number on whatever car or something. So yeah, one of the solution is there is a mix of, let's say, personal responsibility and also the way we organize foundation structuration of open source. But everyone has his own individual responsibility there by, okay, that has been a long day for you, but either write a complete message with information, listen for your maintainer, and also for maintainer to, okay, you want people to give you feedbacks, please be kind to them and don't, it's not because they don't understand that they won't contribute. And the message here is, one of the direction is contributing is not coding. Contributing is, I have a problem, I can write it down. Because maybe no one talked about my problem, and the fact of writing down will help a lot of people. That for me the main problem. And the second one is always the funding. It's not only giving money for 1 year to a project. Please, if you use Linux, please hire people and pay them to contribute back what you have built on. That's an example. That's the same for Jenkins or whatever tools you use. That's the same even for Docker. give back to the community. You might not have the money on your company, no problem. You can go to webinars, you can present, you can create some, let's say, some noise, you can teach people so they can start using it. There are multiple ways on contributing. But that's one of the direction that could improve a lot, because once you have people with the same incentive, you can, let's say, reproduce the same sustainability that we have seen for the past 2 or 3 decades, even for some projects that has been open source for years and years, that are used widely, which is kind of good success. When you see the impact of a security advisory on Log4j, that's also a good indicator. Let's say that's a first world problem. You have a nice software that is useful, provide value, used for free, and anyone can learn and contribute from that. So I think that these are the 2 main issues that we tend to see, at least in a project at the scale of Jenkins.
Those are great points. I think, yeah, so from Docker's standpoint, thinking about how we can help be more inclusive in the open source community and develop a platform that takes some of the burden off maintainers and makes it easier to contribute are definitely some things we can, I think that we can help with. That's great feedback. Thank you. Phil?
It's tough to follow you all. You made such good points, and when you started with a question, I was like, oh, I can mention, and you've all covered them beautifully. But I don't have a lot to add, but I totally agree. I mean, open source is built on communities, and communities are built on goodwill. And I mean, you see this all the time in open source. If people come with an open mind and kind of follow the best practices and just try and think the best of people, you often get faster, better results. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And the other thing I wanted to echo, one of your points you made, which I think is really important, is that contribution doesn't have to be code. In our community, we have kind of, you know, we have various different channels. We've got Twitter, we have a big Slack, that's where the majority of our communication happens. We have we've got Docker Hub with the images, we've got GitHub with all the code, and we can kind of see the different numbers across there. We have like 10 times as many people on Slack as we do on GitHub, and even on GitHub we have probably 10 times the number of people creating issues than we do actually committing code. But all of those are really valid contributions, and without any part of that, you know, it all filters down to the final product. So it's really important to just kind of step up and make your voice heard and try and be part of the community. And I think when it comes to kind of funding and contribution, especially from industry, it's kind of a state of mind thing. And I think my impression of this, both in academia and industry as well, very similar, is that people are coming around to this idea that it's not a one-way street to contribute to open source. Obviously, you get the rewards of your own contributions that you may be using, but also by being part of these communities, you get to learn from other people. You get to kind of often get outcomes that you weren't expecting, and so there's a lot of hidden benefit that comes with contributing to open source, and it's well worth it. And certainly, I mean, with my use case with the NF Core community, it's firstly the fact it's grown so much in such a short time caught me massively by surprise, and showed that there was a niche there and a demand for it, and that people all over the globe now are kind of coming together to work on the same code base. I find that really rewarding, because these people would have been isolated otherwise, and we're all learning from each other's mistakes, we're all learning from each other's contributions, and that's just fantastically rewarding on a personal level as well. In terms of risks, I think, Gavita, one of your points about stability is one of the things that is really key. I've talked about how reproducibility is so important to us, and that's kind of that long-term viability of a project and is really important. So kind of being able to trust that Docker Hub is not going to go under in the next 6 months, or you know, is really important to us, and kind of having that long-term support that you guys have been able to give us, and just being able to trust all these platforms that we work with, and know that we're setting up our infrastructure in the right way is really important. Yeah, I think that'll do for now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the emphasis on community for open source is, I mean, it's the biggest part of open source. And even just this panel here today, I know that all the developers and Docker advocates joining the all hands will probably learn quite a bit from everything that y'all shared today. So I'm excited about that, and always just welcoming everyone to feel that they can give feedback to Docker and share ways that we can help. And we have our public roadmap. And then we'll also think about ways that we can help contributors for your projects as well, because those are great points. Everyone had such great things to say. I had some more questions, but we're at time. So I think I'll just wrap up with a couple of a bit of information. But before that, do any of our panelists, do y'all have anything else that you want to share? I can't thank y'all enough for everything that y'all shared today. It's so great.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's been great.
I have a number to share. Is that combining the latest feature of Docker and the switch to the Docker open source program, we want to be able to deploy each major release of Jenkins. It took us 2.5 hours last year. Now we are next to 10 to 12 minutes. So, I mean, that's just an impressive number even for us. So thanks a lot for all the huge amount. And by the same time, we have also added twice more architectures for Raspberry Pis or other CPUs. So we deploy twice for let's say, and that's impressive. That's really impressive. So thanks for both tooling and the open source program. So a big thank you, and we can only recommend that for tooling and partners.
Awesome, thanks.
Brittany, I have one more question for everyone. It's an easy one. Can you just all share where the community can find and learn more about your projects, whether it's on Docker Hub or on your website? Would just love to share that out.
I'll start. Intel is a project that you may find on GitHub very easily. There is a lot of documentation and everything written about there. We have also dedicated Slack channel where everyone can join and ask for anything, basically everything. I can share everything about his experiences, what he's looking for, and we are also very well welcoming new contributors. We are working a lot with new contributors, especially with the specific programs like the Google Summer of Code, which is a program exactly made to bring new contributors to open source. So we also leverage very common technologies, very famous, not only Docker, but also a lot of other ones. And this is why a lot of beginners comes to our project, basically. So, I mean, if you want to start with open source and you are trying to find something who will welcome you and also is using very, very common technologies, well, Intel could be something for you. And also, well, our specific field is software development with cybersecurity. It's a good start for you. So that's it.
For Library Simplified, you can find more information on librarysimplified.org. There's a website that kind of will point you to all the things that you need to know about this this endeavor by the libraries. Right now, I mean, we want to get to a point where we can also be better at taking contributions. Right now, we are sort of taking a step back and working more to sort of stabilize the product, make sure we can support it for the next few years. So right now, we're sort of taking a step back and just refactoring things and making sure it's usable for the in the future. So, but if there are any questions and any support you can offer, we'd be happy to hear about that.
So for the Jenkins project, we have the website jenkins.io/participate. We have a page dedicated on, depending on the kind of contribution you will want to do, from connecting, discussing, opening an issue to working on the low-level issues. The main starting point besides that page is community.jenkins.io, which is a big forum where people can interact a lot. We have so much communication way, even too much sometimes. So I recommend you to jenkins.io/participate or community.jenkins.io, the 2 entry points to meet and discuss and start raising issue, asking for help or helping others, depending on what you seek.
Ours is another .io address. So the tool is called Nextflow, and it's nextflow.io, or you can Google it. And the community project, which I mentioned, is called NF Core, and I've got my mug here, so you can see how it's the logo and how it's spelled. If you Google it, you'll find it. And on the NF Core website, we've got a big green button that says join, which has all the links to Slack and everything else. And Slack is the best place to join if you want to get involved. There's people joining every day and loads of things to work on. And in fact, we've got a big event coming up in October. So we've got a training followed by hackathon, followed by a Nextflow summit, which is summits.nextflow.io. And those are in person in Barcelona, but also online. So it's a really, if you're interested in workflows, it can be life sciences, but also people coming in from other fields now to work with Nextflow with any kind of large data workflows. Now is a great time to get involved because you can kind of jump into that training and that's like a speed introduction into the community to really get up and running quickly.
Awesome, thank you. So I just want to give one more thank you to our panelists. This has been so awesome. I thank you all for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us for that amazing panel. And Brittany, thank you for hosting with me and moderating. I thought that was a great discussion. We had some really diverse viewpoints. Everyone brought their own perspective from each of their own companies and their own individual projects and their experience with the program. So loved hearing all of that. I think now you had some additional information on the Docker-sponsored open source program you wanted to share with everyone and kind of reiterate some points that I had brought up earlier in the session.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love all the answers in the panel. I wrote down a lot of the insight that they shared for something for the product team to think about going forward. I did want to just go back and recap some of the updates that you went over earlier. So we made some changes to the criteria to join the Docker-sponsored open source program, and we also updated our application. So ideally, this would be much easier for everyone to fill out and for us to process. So if you go to the website that Alyssa shared earlier, you can get the application, which is embedded on the right here, and we overview all the criteria, the benefits that you get as being a part of the program once you're admitted to the program as well. And then once you have filled out the application, you will get an update email on the status of your application as it moves through our review process. So once we've received it, and once it's been accepted or a decision has been made, and then once all the benefits have been allocated to you as well. Another thing I wanted to review is just on Docker Hub, the badging that we recently implemented. If you go to dockerhub.com, and we have these filters, and the Docker-sponsored open source program repositories get this nice badge here, and you also get so you can filter on it in our trusted content category, and the results for the repositories with this badge get prioritized as well. Additionally, one of the other benefits that we recently added was Insights and Analytics tool. This is a tool that is extended to our Docker verified publishers. And we've decided to also extend that to members in the Docker sponsored open source program as well. And this is a docs page that teaches you how to get to those analytics and insights, which is available in the UI if you're a part of the Docker sponsored open source program, and you can also get access to it through our API. I think that's pretty much the wrap up that I have. I know, Alyssa, you have some closing comments that you want to share.
Yeah, so just two quick things to close this out. One, if you have any questions about the panel, the Docker sponsored open source program, or any specific questions for the panelists, you are free to put them into the chat as part of this community all hands. You can also reach out to us if you have a Docker specific question at opensource@docker.com. So definitely utilize those channels. As Brittany mentioned a lot during this, we love feedback. Again, we also have our public roadmap where you can provide commentary and feedback as well. So give us all the feedback. But yeah, thanks Brittany again for joining us on this panel. I had a great time.
And me too. Thanks, Alyssa.